From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. In 2025, artificial intelligence gives us personalized shopping recommendations. It writes emails for us. And all those quick tasks require lightning-fast computing and huge amounts of data. Which is why tech companies like Microsoft and Amazon are building massive data centers around the country. Some state lawmakers have proposed incentives for companies that want to build data centers in Colorado. They say the facilities will create jobs and tax revenue. But skeptics point out that data centers use enormous amounts of electricity and water, which strains power grids and water supplies. To sort through the economic benefits and environmental costs, we reached out to Vijay Gadapalli. He's the Chief Technology Officer with the cloud computing company Radium and a senior scientist at MIT. He talked with me about why some people think Colorado's a good place to build more data centers and how they work.
So a data center is a facility that's used to house computing equipment and all of the infrastructure that helps this computing equipment operate. And so if you look at a typical data center, they're often somewhat ugly buildings, not particularly aesthetically pleasing, usually don't have too many windows. They often look like a warehouse.
Okay.
But really within the data center, there's a lot of computing equipment, storage servers, networking equipment, and all the power and cooling systems that are needed to maintain these systems. Once you're inside, it's actually somewhat boring. It's just rows and rows of computers and lots of fun blinking lights if you're into looking at that.
Well, help me get a sense of how much interaction with data centers we might have in an ordinary day. Let's say I ask ChatGPT to do a little task, summarize an email, or, let's say I do a Google search for the best popcorn popper. Is that contained within my phone, or am I relying on a data center for that?
Yeah, and that has been the biggest change over the past few years, where maybe 4 or 5 years ago, more of those operations would be contained on your phone or on your laptop. These days, because of the computational complexity associated with, say, your ChatGPT query, that query is often collected on your phone where you type it in or you speak to your phone. It is then shipped to a massive data center somewhere, and the processing is performed over there, and the result is sent back to you. So almost every operation we do today is talking to a data center somewhere.
And does it matter where these centers are? I'm curious if there's some advantage to having them closer, in state rather than somewhere else.
It does take time to move data across long distances. And so there is certainly an advantage to having these data centers closer to you. And a lot of the AI applications that are what we call latency bound, or bound by the amount of time it takes to transfer data back and forth, you get these massive advantages to having them closer to you. And that's why we're seeing a wider proliferation of these data centers across the nation.
Well, in Colorado, some lawmakers have said Pueblo would be an ideal place for some data centers because there's a big coal plant there that will shut down soon. Vijay, could you talk a little about what the jobs are like at these centers?
Yeah, so there are a number of jobs right within the construction and just operation of these data centers. Very often, the data center itself, once it's up and running, requires network engineers, data scientists, and maintenance staff. A typical data center may have somewhere between 10 to 20 people. Of course, the scale of the data center is a large factor in that, but that's about how many you might have full-time there. And of course, many, many others that are there to support the equipment that's within the data center.
Help us understand why data centers can be such energy hogs. I've heard rumors that even doing a simple task, sucks up a bottle's worth of water. Is there any truth to that? Certainly.
And, one of the biggest challenges I think we have in AI is just overall transparency. And so some of these numbers are certainly estimates, but you're correct. A conversation that you're having with a tool like ChatGPT could consume up to a bottle of water in order to keep those chips at a temperature that's ideal for them to operate.
Well, there is a bill at the Colorado State House that would offer tax incentives of about $17 million annually to encourage tech companies to build data centers here. How does a data center benefit a local economy in a broad sense? And do you think Colorado risks missing out if they don't entice development?
Yeah, so data centers for a long time have had a pretty significant benefit to the local communities. And, very broadly, you can look at them as the economic benefits, similar to some of the jobs that are created through this, the attraction of talent to this area in order to maintain these large systems. They also do contribute, in most cases, to the local tax revenue of the community that they're in through property taxes.
Okay.
Another very interesting direction of these data centers, and especially some of the more modern ones, is that they often are actually causing an increase in the amount of renewable energy that's available in that local market,
Really?
in that they may have renewable energy sources on site that help them be a good citizen. We've also seen that because these facilities are often so large, they can lead to downstream infrastructure upgrades for the local energy grid. If you're adding a 100-megawatt data center into an area, you might need to do some upgrades to the energy grid itself. And certainly being able to be within the same city often attracts local companies and building some of the technology that's needed for the local community to thrive. But there's also been a debate on the other side where there's now a little bit more awareness of the data centers and their impact on the local community. So, for example, just noise can be a challenge to the community. These air conditioning, chillers, fans, they can often make low frequency noise that some people don't really like.
Sure.
Of course, the power use can be a challenge if you're in an area where there is a limited power availability or energy availability. That can be a challenge that comes up. And sometimes it comes down to what does the local community want, and how do they weigh these different pros and cons, if you want to call it.
Yeah. We're hearing from states like Wisconsin and Virginia, which embraced these centers a few years ago. Some are starting to see utility rates go up for residents near data centers, or they have found the centers don't create as many jobs as they thought once the construction of the building is over. How do you think local leaders should get involved if a data center is proposed for their town?
So certainly working with experts, and there's quite a few, to look at the impact of this data center. I think a lot of the conversations often focused on the environmental impact, but I think looking at the broader picture in terms of, right, we've even heard people like data centers around because they do contribute to property taxes, but they don't cause an increase in traffic because it's not a lot of people. And so sometimes these are seen as an alternative to large-scale industrial venues where they might be using a similar amount of power, but obviously there's a lot more people, and the roads and a lot of the public systems can also be strained in different ways due to that. So I think having the local community working with state lawmakers is always a good idea in anything, and in particularly these setups.
Vijay Gadapalli, a senior scientist at MIT and chief technology officer with Radium, spoke with me about data centers. By the way, I mentioned state lawmakers had debated whether to offer incentives to build data centers in Colorado. There are just a few days left in the current legislative session, so it's looking less likely that that bill will become law. You can read more in our show notes and at KUNC.org. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.